Over the weekend, the Council at the University of Stellenbosch accepted the findings of a three-person panel that found the Vice-Chancellor at the university, Professor Wim de Villiers, was not guilty of serious misconduct for using his discretionary powers to give 2 places to students that his family was related to. The retired judge, Carol Lewis and Conradi and Zianda Steurman found that he was guilty of a deplorable error and a lapse in ethical insight. He's now been asked to make a public apology for his actions, and the people which oversee his salary will make a decision about whether he'll now pay a financial cost for what happened. You know, of course, this is just one of many different stories that have been almost swirling around the university. Dr Rudi is the Vice President and currently Acting President of the Convocation at the University of Stellenbosch. Dr Bass, good afternoon to you and thank you for your time. Firstly, is this the end of this now? Council and all of the other bodies at Stellenbosch, have they accepted this finding, so there'll be no more investigations? Does this draw a line under it all?
Stephen, thank you for having me. Well, what this is, of course, is a critical point in the process of how you rebuild trust. And although the convocation and convocation members have not necessarily had an opportunity to consult on the report as yet, what is, of course, true is that the report had confirmed that the one thing that all convocation members, agreed on, namely that there had been an ethical error of judgment, that had been confirmed, and that led to distrust. And so the challenge now is going forward is to rebuild trust. And that's the process that now really matters. And in my view, the apology of the Vice Chancellor really is a key part of that. It is, of course, encouraging that when you look at the findings as they were announced on Saturday, is that the Council also confirmed and expressed that they considered the Vice-Chancellor's apology in the Council meeting as sincere. And that is critical because that is a part of, in a sense, what you would call the healing process, as you would find, is required in the broader university community.
Key to all of this, as I understand it, well, let me put it to you, was it an important factor that he had asked for advice from a senior colleague and had then followed the advice? In other words, the reason that that's important is that there's no claim against him that he had been dishonest.
Right. So, if you ask my view about it, and it is important that these are critical issues that the convocation must consult in, and so we'll do so in due course. But in my reading, this illustrates that there is, in a sense, a disconnect between what would be legally required in rules and policy and what in the end is what in the leadership struggle, if you will, of leading such an institution, leaders would be challenged with and so. So although the conversation, of course, surely would be what is allowed legally, there's more required. And this, I think, is part of what the further process challenges, former students and former lecturers who form part of the convocations on, namely, how do you support the leaders of a world-class institution in all of these details of how do you manage and lead such an institution in today's world? And I think that's part of the process. So it's broader than, focusing on the particular details only. It's really the challenge for the university community, in my view.
To an outsider, it can seem a bit odd that someone can be found guilty of a lapse of ethical insight. I mean, he's a leader. Leader, who could almost not quite make or break the institution, but an important figure. Yeah. So found guilty of a lack of ethical insight, and yet that's still not guilty of serious misconduct. I mean, I realize lawyers are involved, but still, that seems odd.
Yeah, well, you see, I can't necessarily comment on sort of the details of the particular case, and that's why it's important that when the university releases the full report, one really gets into the details. But the assessment by a committee led by a former judge in a due process with prudence provides, a very clear indication that there had not been malice, there had not been bad intent. And so what has been said in that regard also in the findings as they announced is really important. So when the findings then indicate there hasn't been a clear sort of, dereliction of duty and so, but that it had been an honest mistake, I for myself don't see a reason to doubt those findings of the report. But be that as it may, it doesn't take away the challenge that trust and confidence in how university would be managed must be rebuilt. It is a compliment to governance of the institution that the council had managed the process in such a wise way and dealt with it in such a mature way, if you will. And that the committee, as well as the report, had been quite fair-minded, to my mind, in the findings that had been brought forward. And also, it is interesting, and I think an important point, that the findings indicated that there must be a review of the rules around discretionary placements, which says that one must deal with such an incident in a holistic fashion. But what I am not doubting in any way, and have not found reason to doubt in this process, is that there's a clear commitment to ethical leadership and conduct by the university and its leaders, and in my view, also from the Vice-Chancellor. So at this particular point, although we must still discuss it in detail as a convocation, and, in various and suitable forums, in my reading, we actually had a very good point in terms of what the process could fairly and openly find. It's now the challenge of the university community to take hold of that together and solve any limitations that would cause such an incident and such an episode in the future again.
Dr. Bass, there's serious undercurrents here, okay? And there's more than one narrative to this. Now, I don't mean the different sides of different stories. I mean the different stories. So I think there are people in this country who quite legitimately see this as two young people who got places at the university simply because of who they were related to. And I think this matters in this country. They were related to the white guy who runs this place. And yet I also know there are many persons of color at the university, people who themselves have fought for transformation, who strongly back de Villiers because they see him as a champion of transformation. What is really happening at Stellenbosch?
Well, again, Stephen, you're asking me on details that I can't actually respond to. But let me share my view. As you know, Stellenbosch is really, as an institution, performing very well in global rankings. There's a number of indications to show that the institution is really doing well. And that fact, as a well-run, as a well-performing institution, that would not, we won't be able to question that, also factually. So what I agree on with what you raise is that there would be narratives. But the way that you test the narrative is really in depth, looking at the details of each particular case, and not to function with generalizations and narratives. But it is true that issues such as this we often read as part of dynamics in the country and part of challenges that we have broadly with leadership. And that's not only for higher education and at different institutions, but also for different sectors. We know it's a challenge in our country. So therefore, something like this would be symbolic or taken as symbolic for broader challenges. But in reality, when you look at the findings, you look at the process, you look at what the council announced for how the Vice-Chancellor conducted himself in this process, I do not think that this is the same level of challenge that you find in other such cases that would be similar or read as similar, as nepotism. And again, as I say, it is important to consider the integrity and the prudence of the council process. So the fact that you have a legitimate judge, a legitimate process, a legitimate committee with a proper investigation, with detailed findings, says that there is integrity in the findings, and one must take that. But at the same time, I appreciate, as part of the questions that you would have, in my experience, among members from all, all walks, if you will, and our members are, of course, discussing these challenges for the country. But at the same time, fairly so and reasonably, one must also say, if this is not exactly the same case that we're facing here, let's not add to the load and add all the issues. And this is what I think the report guides us in, to say, all right, let's look at the details. This is an actual fact what had happened, and let's deal with the specifics and resolve this situation. And that's why I say, Stephen, to my mind, this episode, the investigation, the debates within the convocation from various perspectives of the past few weeks, months, in actual fact puts a challenge to myself and to other members of the convocation and ask how much in actual fact support we provide and offer to senior leadership at the institution. What is the type of conversations, the engagements that you have with managers, with the institution, across faculties, senate, and so. And, that is an important question because it says something about how we think about what a university is and how do you safeguard the integrity of higher education and so. So these are not philosophical questions. It boils down to how you in actual fact facilitate that such episodes do not take place. And so whatever the best intent might be of leaders, one has to have that collaboration and partnership between bodies such as the convocation and the university to assist leaders to lead well.
Dr. Rudi Buys, thank you, Vice President and currently Acting President of the Convocation at the University of Stellenbosch.